the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Today's seminar is sponsored and organized by the naming sponsor of the series, Hugo New Corporation. So we have among us, as many of you already recognized, like Dominic Luikenhoff from Hugo New Corporation. Dom is a very good friend and is already known to many of you as she manages the Hugo New sponsorship of this seminar series. She is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Hugo New, and she will introduce today's speaker, Benjamin Van Wong. Just to make a note that we'll not have the meet and greet today, so we will be breaking at 6 o'clock. So all yours, Dom. Okay. Welcome, Ben.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Dibs, thanks for once again having us for this final Hugo New for this final seminar series. We're, actually delighted that we had this this somewhat unexpected opportunity to host brilliance of Benjamin Van Wong. And we met Benjamin a number of years ago, and in fact, really continue to try to see if we can get him to come to to our part of the world to share in the incredible work that he's been doing in terms of environmental activism. I think for this class, I was mentioning that Ben has a background in engineering, and he will talk about his journey. In fact, I'll just let him talk about his journey because there's no one that does it best. But he is globally renowned in terms of his art and in his interpretation and his activism. And I remember saying, making this comment of how do you take such devastating stuff, right, in this world of, trying to save the planet and what we're seeing that's happened, it kind of in this, the man-made adverse impacts, this Earth Day, right, plastics, and turn it into something so appealing and visually, and actually stimulating in a positive way. And that's what I've found so intriguing about his work. And I'm just still mesmerized. And if you guys have not checked out his website, I think we might have included it, but just Google, please check out the work that he has done throughout this journey and around the world. Now, I'm going to just turn it over to you, Ben, and I'm going to say thank you so much. He is in the middle of yet another conference, and he's at Ottawa, the UN. He's circling the globe regularly. But I will also say we have his latest installation on the Hydra. He'll probably share that at our site at Corny Point. I'd love the next stop to be Stevens, Dibs. But with that, I'm thrilled to introduce Benjamin Van Wong.
Hey, thank you so much for that amazing intro. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Whether you want to see my work or not, I guess you don't have a choice because I'm just going to go through that right now and show you guys a little bit of what's up. So Yeah, my name is Benjamin Von Wong. This is kind of the art that I do. I'm an artist, I'm an activist, and I create large-scale objects of curiosity. When people look at my work, the purpose is to get people to have a sense of curiosity. I want people to look at this and wonder, what am I looking at? Is this real? Is this fake? Because I think that curiosity leads to conversation. And if there's one thing we need more of today is conversation. People don't change their minds if you don't engage them in conversation. You can't tell them what to think. They need to come to you. And so when someone says like, wait, what am I looking at? I get to say, oh, well, this is a photograph. This is a photograph of an art installation that I built. The reason why it's glowing is because we have LED lights behind the structure. And we built this actually in a mall all the way in Vietnam over the course of a couple of weeks with the help of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, because each and every one of my projects are community engagement opportunities to bring people together to do something that they could not do alone. And those little lines that you see that make up this art installation, well, these are straws, single-use plastic straws, 168,000 of them, in fact, that we collected, cleaned, and organized over the course of 9 months in order to create a Guinness World Record art installation. I see the role of art as compatible to that of science. It's a complementary to that of science. It doesn't replace it. But too often when you take issues that are too serious, it gets really hard to get traction. And so when we take an issue like the clothing that we wear, which is made out of polyester, nylon, spandex, all plastics, 75% of the textile industry is plastic. And when we take those plastic clothes and we throw them into the laundry machine, well, it releases microscopic pieces of fibers, which enters the food web, which then enters that we then eat, and that entire system just starts to collapse. And that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. But like, how do you get this to be interesting? And I think the answer for that is to use a little bit of art and creativity and metaphors. And so if our laundry is coming to haunt us, why not actually create a monster crawling out of a laundry machine made out of clothes, hanging with fishing wire? And we did this in collaboration with a bunch of students in Georgetown University to create this campaign because they were working on a smaller solution. Art, I think, sometimes is great for things that are even more abstract. I was recently asked by Greenpeace to create a campaign to talk about the energy consumption of Bitcoin mining. For those of you who don't know, Bitcoin uses a ton of energy, more than some countries. And so we were invited to try and create an art installation around that, to take this abstract idea and convert it into art. And because all these old coal-fired power plants were being reopened, I thought that it would be really interesting to incorporate all of that together by making an 11-foot tall skull covered in electronic waste with Bitcoin laser eyes all shooting shooting out of its eyes, and having my little nephew there posing. But it isn't just about creating one piece of art. I think when art is successful, it grows beyond the art itself. You kind of have to lose control over it for it to spread, sort of like how a story or a myth spreads. And in this case, you know, the art gets to be used as more than just maybe one piece of art, but rather it gets to be used on the cover of a climate report, a piece of merchandise, or maybe even adapted to be projected on the side of buildings. And so that's kind of how I see my role in art being utilized. You know, Simon Sinek talks about how it's not about what you do, it's not about how you do it, but rather about why. He talks about this, how the greatest brands in the world, like Apple and Nike, like Nike's not selling you a pair of shoes, they're selling you the idea that you can, you know, be anything that you want to be, that you can pursue impossible things. And I think that is like true, right? Like that why is very important, but more important than the why is trying to get people to actually care about that why. For example, we don't go around the world meeting every single person wondering what their why is. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy. And so in order to get people to be curious, I think that's where you need a little bit of pizzazz, and that's where art comes in. We can use art to draw attention to things and make them more interesting, make them more sparkly, and invite people into a unique and interesting conversation. And so whatever issue that you care about, you know, chances are it could benefit from a little bit of conversation, whether it's political or otherwise. We're entering an era in which everyone is ignoring one another. Nobody really wants to talk with each other. They just want to talk at each other. And I think art can be one of those keys to helping bridge that gap. You know, since I'm an artist and I'm a photographer, I know most of you here are not artists, but I just thought I would share the earlier part of my journey. I actually started off as a hard rock mining engineer. That was my day job. And one day discovered the camera. And on evenings and weekends, I started doing fun, crazy, creative projects, anything that would draw my attention. And I learned very early on that, you know, you could use your creativity to draw attention to things. And people really didn't just care about the final result, but rather they cared about the process of how you got there. So this is some of my earlier work, right? On the left side image, we used flour as smoke, throwing that up into the air to create these magical, like ethereal movements. The center, we used liquid latex that we put on the model's face, and like as she was like peeling it off, it created this venom-like effect. And we learned all sorts of interesting things along the way, like how the flour is absolutely impossible to clean in a studio, so make sure you use someone else's studio. The liquid latex, you have to make sure you don't apply it on like bare on your eyebrows, because then you can't get it off. You got to put Vaseline first. And over there on the right hand side, we just use birthday sparklers, and turns out those burn you if you put it too close to your body. And so, you know, these fun stories that almost like are like a magic trick that reveal how things are done are almost the foundation of what makes something even more interesting, because it's much more about just creating the final result that is good, but rather about how we're crafting a story, how we're creating a sense of intrigue and a sense of curiosity. And so early on in my life, as I was like going around and creating these fun, cool images, I was really focused on explaining to people how I created these images, and just taking them along on the journey. But one challenge that I had was that these photos, even though they were really beautiful, were not really spreading very far. Like the network of photographers that I was sharing it with, they were curious about how I created my images. But beyond that, it was a little bit hard to spread. And I think like one hypothesis that I have is that the earlier work that I did, like for example, this photo over here, it's hard to explain to someone. So even if you might find it beautiful, it's really hard to explain. Like, what is this? It's just three people dressed up as tree people inside of a tree. It doesn't have like a compelling title. But when you look at this image over here, where I tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck while I was on vacation with my parents in Bali, that even in words sounds interesting. So if I was sitting down next to a complete stranger at a bar and I said, hey, I just tied a model 30 meters underwater, do you want to hear about the story? It's like, wait, no, tell me more. That is crazy. How is that even possible, right? And so words matter even if you're visual artists. And if you care about something within the world of sustainability, how are you going to summarize whatever it is that you care about, whatever it is you're working on, in a way that people want or need to pay attention to it? Right? That is like a key piece of it. So language truly matters, where people, we speak, we communicate through language. And that language is ultimately how things spread. And we need to really be careful when we think about something that is important to us and we want it to spread, how people are going to speak about it. And if we can't come up with a compelling way to explain whatever that thing is, no one is going to do that effort for you. And so for me, taking this idea of a headline and applying it to my work in order to create as much visibility as possible for my projects was something that I started applying across the board, because I mean, artists are all about survival, and eyeballs equal survival. So consistently trying to figure out, how can I create conversations around my projects? This over here, we put superheroes on the edge of a 40-story skyscraper. This is all the way in San Francisco, right above Market Street. And you know, the funny thing about a project like this is that you can look at this and you don't even need to like the image, because you're just kind of captivated by it. So like this, for example, my work is, you know, this was a pretty polarizing image because we had photoshopped out the harnesses from the model. And so some people were like, well, this looks like a painting. Why did you do it for real? Even if, you know, if you're going to Photoshop things out anyways. And this kind of like debate that was going on whether or not it was good to Photoshop things out or not, is actually kind of the foundation of engagement. You want people to have discourse. You want them to have conversations. In an ideal world, you don't want them to just say cool and move on with their lives. You want people to have an exchange of energy. And so this is kind of what I did in my earlier days, was just kind of go around, take any opportunity that I had. So I was in between two conferences, going on a road trip with my friends. We just call up random places. This is the world's largest monastic library in Stift Admont. We talked to one of the monks and said, hey, can we have permissions to take photos there? No one had ever tried to do a cool photo shoot there before. And, this was like a real world Beauty and the Beast in the world's largest monastic library, right? Once again, that kind of compelling title and headline with a bunch of story elements, like there's a person hiding under her dress, poofing it out. And so having these fun little stories and moments really humanizes the moment and like makes the art go from also something impressive but into something human. And so by doing projects like this and by getting really good at marketing, I eventually started getting bigger and bigger projects. I was finally able to make money. And so I ended up creating this campaign that I did for a cell phone company called Huawei. They were the second largest cell phone company at the time in 2015. Now they're banned in the United States, so a little fall from grace there. And they wanted the coolest image possible on a smartphone. So I ended up creating this fire angel, and my face ended up being on the side of all these billboards. This is the side of the Westfield Mall in London. And I got paid more in this one project than my entire career combined. It was almost like winning the lottery. I mean, to be fair, I didn't earn that much money, so it wasn't that hard to beat. But it was cool to finally have a bunch of savings in the bank and just be like, wow, is this it? Like, have I successfully become a commercial and successful artist? Because for a while, that was really what I was striving for, to be independent, to be paid, to be creative. And I realized that actually, no, that wasn't enough. If anything, it made me sort of doubt my entire career path, because just doing cool projects for the sake of doing cool projects and getting paid for that was just really not quite hitting the spot. And so when I slowed down for a moment and I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do with my skills and talent, I started to remember like all the different projects that I was most proud of. And it was not the project that I was paid the most for, but rather the projects that I did because it had a great impact. So this video that I created for a family, this little girl is called Eliza O'Neill, and she was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative brain disease called Sanfilippo syndrome. And basically the syndrome means that around the age of 3, this little girl would slowly lose the ability to walk, talk, and speak until she couldn't feed herself anymore in her teenage years. And so it's essentially like a reverse Alzheimer's. And her father was like, hey, you know how to make things go viral. You can get things seen. Would you be open to coming to our house and helping us make a video? And I said, sure. I ended up flying over, slept on their sofa, made a video. I had never made a video before, figured it out. And over the course of a month, we raised $1 million. By the end of the year, we raised $2 million. And I was like, this is what the power of art is. This is what the power of storytelling is. And I wanted to find a way to take the work that I was doing, all this fantasy and surreality, and combine it with something more impactful. But of course, there's a little bit of a gap, right? Like the work that I do, which is very fantastical, and this work, which is very like documentary, there's a little bit of a gap. And it was really hard for me to make that transition. I decided to take an entire year sabbatical to focus on how to make this jump. It actually took me 18 months to figure it out. And my idea was like, oh, I want to work with nonprofits. I just want to work with nonprofits. I'll work for free. I have a portfolio, but it turns out no one wanted to work with me. And why? Because I had no experience working in nonprofit. And no one wants to like take a chance on you to do something very risky if they haven't seen it done before. And so I found myself kind of on my own, experimenting, trying hard to show how I could use fantasy to create an impact. And some of the earlier projects that I did look something like this. This was a project that I did. It was actually my ex-girlfriend's idea, my girlfriend at the time. She thought, well, we had just watched a documentary about climate change, and she's like, why don't we use storms as a metaphor for climate change? And so we hopped on a car with a storm chaser, went storm chasing for 2 weeks across the Great Plains, chasing these storms at 50 miles an hour inside of a used ambulance. And the ambulance was perfect because you could just store a bunch of stuff inside and throw it out. And so you'd have to go down these crazy little dirt roads and then pull out a bunch of stuff, take photos, and then put it all back in before the storms caught up to you. So you had like 3-4 minutes to capture these images. And I just remember saying, oh, after this project, and I was like, wow, there's something here. Like I can find a way, like I wanted to showcase how like ordinary people were ignoring these big, massive weather events happening behind them, and use that as a metaphor for climate change. And you know, while this image doesn't have as much magic and fantasy as my prior work, it really gave me the sense that, okay, there's something here. Because like a lot of environmental impact stuff is all very abstract. And so it needs abstraction, it needs interpretation in order to be explained. And so I continued down that experimental path, trying to find different ways of incorporating it into whatever I was already doing. And so this one time I ended up in Fiji. I was teaching a photography workshop there, and I was reaching out and I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to go to Fiji, there has to be some positive impact thing that I could do. I reached out to different people and I learned that Fiji had some really amazing shark dives. And I thought, well, if I have experience tying a model underwater, why not tie a model with some sharks swimming around, in order to talk about shark conservation and how we kill 100 million sharks every single year, and yet sharks are like a keystone species, and barely a few of them, you know, cause any threat to mankind. And I think a photo like this, like when you think about it, you're like, wait, what does this have to do with impact? Well, it creates conversation. Because like when we put this up online, it hit the front page of Reddit 3 times. You know, it got people like wondering, like, wait, why did you tie a model underwater? Like, isn't it not safe? And then you get to say, no, there's like hundreds and hundreds of species of sharks, and only a few of them are remotely dangerous to humans. And so you can use these moments of curiosity that are ignited to have these important conversations with people, to draw them more into the fold. And we ended up generating 80,000 petition signatures on change.org to create a shark sanctuary in Malaysia. And so, but as cool as these projects are, none of these are very repeatable, right? Like you can't just like go storm chasing all the time and putting people in front of it for different causes. You can't just keep tying people underwater with different things swimming around. And so like none of these really had this idea of repeatability. As cool as they weren't repeatable. And it wasn't until I stumbled across this other project and that this happened. And so I'll just show you a video right now. It's just 2.5, 3 minutes. And it'll give you an insight of like how these projects are actually done and what they look like.
How do you get people to talk about something that is ordinary, ugly, and boring? I wasn't too sure, but from experience, I know that the internet loves to see things that are extravagant, unique, and different. So applying that same concept to plastic bottles, having 10,000 of them seemed like a great start at making something ordinary into something extravagant. With more plastic than fish in the sea scheduled for 2050, it made sense to add an ocean component to the project. A sea of plastic was interesting and sad, but it needed something unique and beautiful to truly stand out. What more unique and beautiful to represent the ocean than a mermaid? And so with the help of a waste management center called Tomra and a local artist called Cynthia, we ended up with 10,000 plastic bottles that came in a 50-foot truck, along with a beautifully designed, handmade mermaid tail. This unexpected combination, I felt, had the potential to be something truly different. So with all 3 components to make things shareable, the extravagant, the unique, and the different, I felt like we had all of the ingredients necessary to create something that could potentially make the boring topic of plastic pollution more shareable. As the shoot deadline creeped forward, dozens of volunteers joined us in our quest, contributing whatever they could, from helping us clean and delabel thousands of bottles, to rigging up my camera to the ceiling with plywood and pulleys, to borrowing a 52-inch TV from Costco. For the mermaid, talented artists came together to transform our beautiful model into a believable mermaid. And before I knew it, all the pressure was on me, waiting to see if the concepts would work or just be flushed down the drain. As the day flew by, volunteers worked tirelessly, pushing bottles around, collecting them, organizing them by color before tossing them right back out onto the floor to create a new set of patterns that some crazy photographer had told them to do. Slowly but surely, an extravagant, unique, and different series appeared, just like I had hoped. But deep in the back of my mind, one nagging thought remained. How much difference could a series like this possibly make in encouraging people to stop using plastic bottles? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I guess I'm about to find out.
So this project ended up getting 36 million views on social media. It was one of the most successful projects that I ended up that I created at the time, and I was just like, wow, this is wild. Um, it all happened because my mom had found a mermaid tail designer, and my sister was getting married in Montreal, and I had just learned about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and I'm like, I need to do something because I want to figure out how to combine a mermaid tail and, raise awareness for plastics. And it was just really convenient because the entire bridal party was in town to help me sort through all the plastics. And so, sometimes these projects, they just take off, and all it takes is for you to get out there and experiment and explore, and one of them ends up hitting home, and you never know when that's going to be. And so with this project, I actually figured out, well, using massive amounts of material that is discarded is a perfect way to talk about the problem of overconsumption. And this is something that's perfectly repeatable. You can do it across materials. And so I ended up, at a talk like this, where I was talking to people and saying, hey, if you ever find large amounts of material, really let me know. And this one girl that I ended up becoming friends with, she was talking about fast fashion. And she found this large abandoned warehouse in Cambodia with piles and piles of clothing that were abandoned in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. And I was like, wow, we need to go there and do some art with it before they were selling it off as cheap fuel. Can you imagine that? Like poor people burning this, and releasing all these toxins into the air. And so we ended up going in, using all of this art and trying to talk about different aspects of the fast fashion industry. Like, if a single cotton t-shirt uses 2,500 liters of water, what does our entire closet look like? Right? These stats, they really add up. And after that, like, as I started doing more of these projects, when I would go to a conference and I would talk about this stuff, I would have brands come up to me. In this case, Dell came up to me and they were like, hey, have you ever done a project on electronic waste? And I was like, what is electronic waste? Well, it turns out e-waste, which is basically anything electronic that's thrown away, is one of the fastest growing municipal waste streams in the world. Less than 15% of it is recycled. It leaches toxins into the environment. And I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you guys all have used phones lying around your house that are just sitting around there. But these can be recycled, they can be reused, they can be refurbished, and they wanted to find a way of communicating that into the world. And when you look at my projects, they might look really unique, but when you break them down, they're actually just made up of things that we've all seen and heard before. Like this is the opening scene of Blade Runner 2049, inspired by the solar panel arrays, except this time we use laptops. We tried to recreate the inside of a circuit board, but just using mice and adapters and Ethernet cables. And then we just combined that with like a lady that's body painted as Tron. And now you have something that's completely different because you've combined all of these elements together. Oh, there's also a person hiding behind her with a leaf blower to make her hair zip up like that. But we just combine all these elements together to create something that is new, because that's actually the definition of what is cool. It's something that is unique and different, but not too different that we find it weird. And for a while, it felt like I had found Ikigai, right? Like, I was doing this work, it was meaningful, it was something that I was good at, something that I enjoyed, it's something that the world needed, and I was finally getting paid for it. And so this is, I think, kind of the holy grail of what it means to have like a fulfilled life. But I think what nobody tells you when they tell you to go and find your purpose and pursue your Ikigai, it's that just because you find it doesn't mean you get to keep it. Just because you find it doesn't mean you get to keep it, because the world is constantly changing, right? Like, what you can get paid for is changing. What the world needs is changing. What you love is changing, and what you're good at is changing. And this is the thing that they never tell you. And so Ikigai is actually much less of a destination. It is much more of a journey. And in other words, another way to phrase it in the exact same way is that the 10,000-hour rule is a lie. Because the 10,000-hour rule actually only works for things like, I don't know, chess or tennis, where like the rules of the game are actually the same. But if you are trying to create impact in the world, and that impact requires you to interface with the world and to market, then you're talking about a relationship between what you want and what the world needs. And that relationship requires constant work. And unless you really love what you do, it's going to be really challenging to stay updated. And in my case, that became immediately apparent with the way the world was shifting. So in my world, what that looked like, I was creating these large, cool photographs. And then at some point, Instagram started coming out. And I really love this because this is an Instagram channel called Insta Repeat, which just goes and scrapes the web for images that look kind of similar. And you're like, wait, I've seen all of this stuff before. Why have you seen these before? Is because like at some point in Instagram's history, people just started posting the same thing, but slightly differently. Because Instagram started to realize that if you want people to keep scrolling longer, it's better not to show them weird things all the time. It's better to show them things that are slightly similar to one another and that just keep people scrolling mindlessly for hours and hours on end. And then after a while, it wasn't just about creating images that were similar to that of other people. It was about making sure that you had videos. It didn't matter how good your photos were anymore, because now it was about videos. And now we're entering the era of AI and artificial intelligence, where there's even more competition for those same 24 hours in everyone's person's day, trying to capture people's attention to the max of their ability. And now if you take this AI and you just like plop in a few words like this, which looks like an image that I could have created. Actually, it's an image that I wanted to create. This idea of taking like the Little Red Riding Hood and putting her inside of a Brothers Grimm forest that's gotten clear cut. But like this was actually created in just a couple minutes using a tool called Leonardo.ai just to generate images. And now you can do this stuff. You can do this stuff with just a few prompts. And so what does it mean for me as an artist who knows what he's good at, but which takes so long to create, right? Like I only create 1, 2, or maybe 3 projects a year. It takes me months of planning to do these large physical complex builds. And I think like this realization that you might be really good at what you do and that might not be enough is actually kind of a terrifying feeling. I think this maybe gets especially true as you get older and older. You kind of feel like the world just keeps moving faster and faster. And I think one might just say that in some ways, like I, even now in this moment, find myself in somewhat of a crisis. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to make decisions? Where am I supposed to go if my work is no longer able to keep up with the changes that are happening? But when we look at this idea of crisis, I think it's really interesting to sometimes like zoom back and see when we've encountered these situations before. And so if we take the word crisis, in my case, one might say that earlier in my career, when I was creating beautiful work that I couldn't figure out how to get anyone to pay me for, because I was only reaching photographers and photographers don't hire other photographers, that maybe that was like a form of crisis. And then later on, as I started to create more work and wanted to get paid for it, that was great. Like this was a campaign that I did for Nike, show how their people thought differently. And we just stuck them on the edge of another 40-story skyscraper, but this time in the Philippines, had them running across the buildings and defying gravity. This was great, except that I decided that I no longer wanted to create campaigns that were just earning people money. I wanted to create campaigns that had a mission and a purpose to it. And so I was back in a state of crisis again. So then I'm pivoting. I'm trying to figure out, how do I create impact with my photography? I'm creating images like this that are trying to incorporate environmental themes, but I'm back to not earning money because I'm doing social impact work and I still haven't proven myself. And so then I finally figure it out a little bit. I'm doing these projects. I finally managed to convince Greenpeace to create create this campaign with me to highlight how every 60 seconds a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean. And so now I'm getting paid. I'm creating impactful work. I'm doing photography, but the world's changing. Algorithms are shifting. It doesn't make sense anymore to spend so much money on a photo shoot. So that's back to a stage of crisis. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? These photo shoots aren't really worth it anymore. No one's going to pay for them. I know, I'm going to create large scale art installations instead. And so I end up in Cairo building the world's tallest closet. This time I'm like, no, photography's done. We're just going to move over to art installations. We're going to create experiences. Everyone loves experience. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let me tell you what could go wrong. We could have COVID and we're all locked in our homes. You can't go out. You can't create anything. You can't meet anyone. Back to a stage of crisis. And so, you know, it's almost as if this idea of being in crisis is something that one just can't escape. It's almost part of the human condition. And if I take a step back and, you know, we break down the word crisis, into two characters in Chinese, well, on the left side, we have the word danger, yes, but on the right side, we also have the word opportunity. Because one might argue that if I didn't encounter all of these crises along my career, and if I just stuck with what worked, then my work today wouldn't be so interesting. It wouldn't have had the opportunity to evolve and grow into what it is today. And so changing our relationship to crisis may be one piece of that answer. And if I like zoom back out for a second, like this is what my entire life is expected to be. Like the average person lives 4,000 weeks, and each one of these dots represents 1 week. And if we look at the red, that's me until I actually like figured out photography. And then the first little orange segment there, I was me trying to make money with photography. And then it was me trying to figure out how to have impact, and then me trying to figure out how to get paid to have impact. And then it was COVID, and then it was back to installations, and so on and so forth. And so you'll see that actually I'm basically consistently in some level of crisis. And so I might as well get better at my relationship with crisis, because otherwise I'm just going to be miserable all the time. Because ultimately the crisis of today becomes the story of tomorrow. This is not a bad thing. It is an opportunity for us to grow. It is an opportunity for us to change, and it is an opportunity for us to figure out what we want to do with ourselves. And that is also what it means to be human. When we face a hard decision, I think it's also important to realize that, our lives are constantly evolving and constantly changing. We can't go back in time, but as we look forward in time, there are just as many opportunities that lay ahead to us as there are that are before. And it's just up to us to figure out how to make those right decisions. How do we make sure that we're focusing on the decisions that we want to do, and that we're creating the conditions for success to be true? And an example of that is this project that I was invited to do during the pandemic. The government of Canada hired me to create an art installation. And I thought that with plastics production constantly increasing to the point where we're completely unable to figure out how to recycle it anymore, that the idea of creating a giant plastic tap would be perfect. I got my entire family involved. That's my mom over here on the right. She's really short, so she makes my installation look really tall, which is great. To talk about different aspects of the plastic pollution problem. Like, we export so much of our waste to poorer countries so that we don't have to deal with it. And that's my nephew. He was born during the pandemic. And single-use plastic production increased by 250% during the pandemic. It's absolutely wild. And I think this idea that every single piece of plastic that has ever been produced, every single piece of plastic that's ever been produced is still around today, will still be around when my nephew becomes my age. It will still be around in 3, 4, 5, 10 generations from now, because plastics never goes away. It just breaks down into smaller and smaller parts. And we don't know how to solve this problem. And so one way to fix that is to turn off the plastic tap. And because this was a commission by the Canadian government, we ended up taking this art installation, sending it off to Paris, and getting it put in some fancy gallery and getting it displayed. And at the end of the day, like, on the one hand, this is great. It was a well-paid project. It was beautiful art. I was very proud of the project personally, and it was showed in a fancy gallery. And I think, like, for some people, this would be enough. You would look at this and be like, okay, this is what success looks like. But I think it's always important to question, like, why do we do what we do? Right? What is actually bringing us to life? Because when we know what our values are, that determines, that tells us what to keep doing, when to give up, when to keep going. And in my case, the goal behind the art pieces that I create isn't just to be well paid, to have it featured in a nice gallery, and to create good art, but rather I really want to find ways of creating social change with the work that I create. That's always the aspiration. And if I can find a way to do that, then I need to continue pushing. And so, so I think this idea of Ikigai, this journey of Ikigai, to constantly come back to it and to constantly question, are you in alignment with where you're trying to get to, is really, really important. And, as I thought about this project that I had just completed that was really good, but didn't really feel like it reached the people that it needed to, I realized that there's a global plastic treaty that was going to be happening at the United Nations Environmental Assembly. And this is actually where 1,500 delegates from 193 different countries were going to come together to actually negotiate a global treaty on plastic pollution. I was like, wait, this is a place where I need to be. This is where the art needs to go. How do I get there? And as with most things, there is no straightforward answer. So we ended up fundraising to collect 3 tons of plastics from the local slums of Kibera. We found a local production partner to collect, clean, and organize these hundreds and hundreds of bottles of plastics. We managed to get permission from the United Nations at 5 p.m. on a Friday for an 8 a.m. install on a Sunday. And somehow in the nick of time, just barely managed to pull this project together and build this art installation. And once again, against all odds, these 1,500 delegates from 193 different countries ended up signing a global plastic treaty into place. And it's something that I think that was, if I didn't know that this was what I really wanted to be doing with my life and my career, and to be able to push for it, even though it was a project that I actually did not make any money on, that this was not something that I would have actually actively pushed for, because I wouldn't have known to push for it. But knowing what you want and knowing what you're trying to get to tells you when to push. And for me to be able to create an art installation like this at the United Nations meant the world, because it wasn't just about creating the art, but rather seeing how the art was being used by all the participants at the conference, the for-profits, the nonprofits, the government organizations, all coming together to agree upon something, because art is abstract. It is not literal, meaning people don't know exactly what they're supposed to think, so they can interpret it however they want to interpret it. And everyone has a different vision of what it means to move the needle forward, but everyone can agree on where we're trying to get to. And the art ends up supporting an entire movement, rather than just advertising for like one large piece of the pie. And this campaign ended up being so successful. This art installation that I had self-funded and fought to get to the United Nations ended up being so successful that it ended up being used in just 3-4 months ago on the cover of the United Nations Plastic Report. And the art installation has since continued to tour and been remixed in different places and different cities and different countries. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't pushed that one little bit more to get that art installation forward that nobody was asking for. Literally no one was asking for it except me. And today, actually right here where I am right now, the giant plastic tap is here at the INC4 plastic treaty negotiations, where people are negotiating the nitty-gritty of what's supposed to be inside of the treaty in Ottawa right here. And so the symbol continues. It continues to make change. It continues to reach people. It continues to invite them to think differently and to communicate it out with their constituents on why this is important to them and to the world. And so I think it's important for us to figure out when we want to take risks, because progress without risk is impossible. You're not going to get anywhere by avoiding risk altogether. And so when do you want to take risks? When are you going to fight for the things that you really believe in, that you really want to see exist in this world? And I think where I'm at today, though, there's still a frustration. You know, I've done all these projects around plastics, especially, except that as an artist, you look at this graph and you go like, wow, I don't know, I started my work somewhere in 2015, and in 2015, since 2015, that curve has only continued to grow. And it almost doesn't matter that more and more people care today, because the projections are looking really, really dire. And there are people out there that are talking about recycling, but even the most optimistic projections of recycling and incineration just cannot keep up with the volume of production that is happening. We just can't find a way to keep up with how much waste is being produced consistently. And I think there's something really depressing about it, because, and this is the piece that is currently up in Carney Point, the single-use plastic problem feels to me like a hydra that can't be defeated. We keep coming in, we keep cutting one head off, second one keeps sprouting out. And so for the latest piece that I created up on the High Line for Earth Month with Keels that Carney Point has graciously offered to host for the next 6 months, you know, I'm reminded of this beast that is constantly growing, and that no matter what you do, it just can't seem to be defeated. And that's really, I think, really depressing and really, really defeating in some ways, because in a sense, we're looking at the science, and we're looking at the science, and that science is getting really, really terrible. And the art that is being created as a byproduct is, I think, fueling in part some of that despair, because Most people already know plastics is a problem. So if you're just going out there and creating more plastic art, then you're just fueling more of that despair. And I think sometimes we need to think about also the balance that we bring into the world. How do we also bring in a sense of wonder and magic with the work that is being created? It can't just be about how terrible things are all the time. It also needs to be about how wonderful things can be. And this is something that I've been asking myself, is how do I create and inject more wonder into the work that I create? Because it can't just be, it's not even just for other people, it's for myself. Like, I am starting to get depressed by my own work, and I need to find a way out of that, because if I want to keep creating, I also need to be inspired, and plastics does not inspire me anymore. So one of the recent things that I discovered, and this will be the last story I share with you guys, is this magical thing called biochar. Biochar is responsible for 89% of verified carbon removal credits. Carbon removal credits, not just carbon credits. That's carbon that is sequestered into the ground, never to see the light of day for the next 1,000 years. And I discovered this by attending a conference, inviting myself over to some girl's house and saying, hey, can I join you? Can you teach me about this? Because it sounds really interesting. And so I ended up, and biochar is basically created through a process of pyrolysis. You take organic material, in this case, bamboo on the left side, you put it inside of a kiln, a low oxygen environment to burn the bamboo, but you burn it without contact to oxygen. And so it ends up basically like cooking, overcooking at 200, 300, 400 degrees, and it ends up as a carbonized structure. You end up with pure hard carbon that you can take, you can sequester it into the ground, and it acts. It's really great at soil remediation, capturing water, preventing fertilizer runoff. It's got a ton of benefits. And I thought, why not create art with that? So we ended up in Thailand, taking these pieces of bamboo biochar, piecing them together in order to create a giant phoenix made from my carbon footprint of a round trip ticket from Montreal to Thailand. And I think when I look at this, it brings me a lot more hope, because yes, of course, it's representing the problem of biochar, of our carbon footprint, and the amazing amount of work that we need to do to draw that out of the air. But when you look at this, what you're seeing is the magnitude of the solution that could be there. Or you're no longer talking about the problem. You're saying, hey, look at how beautiful the solution could be. And I think there's just something really different about creating art that focuses on hope rather than art that focuses on despair. And that's where I'm hoping to move my work as I look forward into the future. And as you guys contemplate careers in sustainability, to also think about how are you bringing both hope and reality at the same time, because we need a little bit of that balance. Anyways, as we enter the next phase of technology, we're reaching a point today where artificial intelligence is stepping in. And so while the why is still critical, this wow factor, the wow factor of creating something that has a great story, is becoming easier and easier and easier, because artificial intelligence does help you create stories easier. It helps you create art easier. You have more tools at your disposal today than ever before to tackle the biggest crises of our time. And so with that, I invite you to contemplate 3 final questions. The first is, as you think about the different passions that you have, that you want to share with the world, the different solutions you want to introduce, is how will you cultivate curiosity? How will you cultivate curiosity to build a movement, a legion of people who want to help and support you in what you are doing and to champion whatever it is you are working on? The second is to think about which crises you will celebrate. Maybe you can look back on some of the crises that you have faced over your life already and figure out how you can reframe that into an opportunity that has helped to make you stronger and helped to get you to where you are today. And the third and final one is which risks will you pursue, right? Nothing is without risk. Some jobs are going to pay more. Some might pay less in the beginning. Why are you going to pursue those risks? That is it. That is my presentation for you. Thank you so much.
Wow.
Wow.
That was